How do you build a high-performing culture? This is Culture Architects. Candid conversations with extraordinary leaders sharing their biggest successes, failures, and lessons learned on their culture journeys. Here's David J. Friedman.
Today on Culture Architects, we're joined by Robert Cujo Teschner. Cujo is a combat veteran. He's the founder and CEO of VMax Group. Like a lot of our guests that we've had on the show, Cujo's approach to culture building is backed by an amazing journey. He was an F-22 fighter squadron commander with the U.S. Air Force. He was also an instructor at the U.S. Air Force Weapons School. When he was instructor, he was considered the Air Force's subject matter expert on team accountability. And his published work is still in use today. After his retirement from the military in 2015, Cujo found ways to keep sharing that expertise through his 2018 book, Debrief to Win, and through his leadership consulting firm, VMax Group. For his ability in using this accountability to produce high-performing teams, in 2022, Cujo was named Vistage Worldwide's Speaker of the Year. Cujo, welcome to the Culture Architects podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me here, David. It's great to be in your virtual midst today.
I love having it. So let's start with a little bit of background for our listeners. So walk us through, you spent all this time in the Air Force, and I know that what you teach people today came from that experience. How did you make the transition from being in the Air Force to entrepreneurship and now the leadership consulting work that you did? Give us a little bit of that history.
Great. Well, I think in order to answer that question, I got to go back to where did this whole idea kind of sprout, to translate what it is that we're doing in high performance military teams into the business space. And it comes back to a couple of decades ago when I was teaching at our fighter weapons school, the Air Force Top Gun program. Somebody who's very near and dear to my heart was lamenting the state of leadership in the organization where she worked. And she was just talking about how, like, if leadership could be better, her enthusiasm for coming to work would be that much stronger. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things we do very well, I told her, was, teach leaders at a young age how to lead effectively. And in so doing, build teams that you want to be on. Maybe someday we'll go and teach this military approach someplace outside of the military. All right. So idea hatches that someday we do it, but I don't take any action on the idea, David, because I enjoyed flying high performance fighter aircraft. I love flying F-15s and F-22s. Colorectal cancer took that away from me. And when my body was reconfigured to allow me to stay alive, I had to rethink what it was that I was doing with my time. And as a consequence of being in two American small businesses that really never got to where it was that they could have been, I decided to take action on the idea that hatched a couple of decades ago and decided to try and teach accountable leadership and high performance teamwork into American small businesses, medium-sized business, and then expanded that.
Wow. And so as you made that transition, there's a lot of stuff to unpack in here, but as you made that transition into the business world, what are some of the things you quickly discovered were the same, and maybe some things that are different that don't work the same way when you're in business versus in the military?
Yeah, here I think what we find is that it's pretty much all the same. A team is a team is a team. And the human interactions that allow us to team well are very, very much the same no matter what kind of a team we're on. And so all we have to do is recognize this, that the teamwork is universally the same. There's different factors, there's different ways in which we team, there's different environments within which we team, but the team dynamics that allow us to achieve performance while building trust, that stays the same. And so I found that not only was it easy to go this route, but actually a lot more fun, because I find that, when we go back and we teach to military style teams, to police units, like there's an element of, okay, we kind of have a similar starting point. In small business, we're coming from all kinds of different starting points. And so we're probably making a lot more progress there than when we come back and work with the Air Force or with police departments or whatever, which we find to be a tremendous joy.
I would imagine, I think about, so I don't know if I've ever shared with you that one of my brothers went to West Point So had spent a number of years in the Army, and so had been through leadership training there. And I remember when he came out of the military, and I'm sure many people face this challenge, my observation of him in the military and that dynamic was, one, on the positive side, he had learned at a very early age how to lead people, as you're saying, because the military does a better job than almost anybody in teaching that. On the other hand, the dynamic of people having to follow orders. Now, I totally get that you still have to be the kind of leader they'd want to follow, but still you have the ability to say, you don't have any choice here. You got to do what I told you to do. That dynamic is very different than in the civilian environment, where at some level you have to inspire people to want to follow you. Now, again, I'm assuming that you still have to inspire them in the military. It's not like you don't have to do that, but you have this ultimate power that you can wield in the military that you don't have any choice here, folks. You got to do this. And in the civilian world, you don't have that. So what's your experience of that adjustment, and how did you deal with that?
I think a fighter squadron is a little bit different from other parts of the military. And there is formal authority that you have. So a squadron commander, fighter squadron commander, has formal authority delegated to him or her from higher headquarters and whatnot. And there is an element of, at some point you got to salute and do as told. But if that's the entirety of what it is that you're basing your leadership off of, and if that you think is going to motivate a group of people to want to follow you, then you're probably not doing it very well. And I think in fighter squadrons, the positional, the formal authority is an element. Yeah, it's always there, but it's the other part of how it is that we inspire our teammates to want to go forth and do this thing that's much more interesting. And I was blessed during the entirety of my time in fighter squadrons to work for leaders, I'd say almost universally, who really inspired me to want to bring my all every day. And it wasn't just their positional authority that inspired me, but rather it was the fact that I loved the way that they engaged with us. I really appreciated the fact that they lived what they preached, and they could do everything that they were asking of me. And many of them had demonstrated extreme competence in combat. And, you don't know who you are until you've been shot at. A lot of these people had done the job and, come back and were trying to teach us how to do it. So like across the spectrum of things that you'd want from a leader, like they were demonstrating it every day. And I've found that if we could emphasize the other side of the leadership, the non-positional authority piece, the part that like you talked about, inspires a team to want to follow, then we're in a great spot. And a fighter squadron is a unique place. Like, your performance is measured constantly. You have to stand by what it is that you've demonstrated. Like, either you can do the job or you can't. Like, there's a lot of things about it that really stand out. And so if we can take that and bring it in as well and bring that into the business world, it makes the conversation a lot easier. Like when it's fuzzy and we don't really have any standards and you're just trying to be overly nice, it's you don't really get to performance. When you have standards and you expect the same thing from your team that you would expect of yourself, and you can demonstrate that you can deliver it and you can teach them how to, it creates a much better environment. And so I think there's this general understanding of, and different pockets of the military experience leadership differently. A military organization is rigid, it's disciplined, it's bureaucratic, it's hierarchical. If you don't do as told, you're going to be punished. I'm fortunate that the kinds of organizations that I was a part of, the subunits, the fighter squadron level, it was about generating respect from your teammates, building the bonds of trust while you did it, living what it is that you preach, being proficient in the things that you expected from your teammates. And it was a totally different dynamic. And it's a really good one.
Do you think that different dynamic was a result of the fact that you were, in such combat situations versus maybe in a I'm making this up, but in a logistics unit where you're not faced with combat?
For sure.
That aspect of we must rely on each other is different.
Absolutely. 100%. I mean, there is something about, you mentioned Army foxhole mentality that draws people together. If you're under the gun, there's bad things that are happening around you. It tends to draw a group of people with disparate backgrounds close together. And for sure, if you're going forward into that kind of environment, it is an incentive to figure out how to team well. And so that's another benefit of that background. One that I find to be very relatable to the business world, by the way.
Yeah. So I was in our company. We've been doing this year a book of the month, just a book to read, do a little lunch and learn, and we get on a Zoom call and share it. And last month, our book was Stephen M. R. Covey's The Speed of Trust. Have you read that book?
I have not read that book.
Oh, you would love that book. It's a fabulous book. And it's all about, he calls it the speed of trust, because what he says is that when trust exists in an environment, in a relationship, you just get speed. Things happen quickly because we trust each other. And then he looks at what are some of the behaviors that create trust. And something that he talks about that I think is pretty interesting and relatable to what you were saying, at least as I'm hearing it, is he talks about trust having many different facets, but two particular aspects of trust that are equally important. One he calls character, and the other he calls competence. And so the character part, of course, is I trust you, I trust your integrity, I trust the kind of human being you are. And that's really important. And equally important, especially in a fighter squadron, I'm assuming, and you referred to it as you talked about the leaders who inspired you, is you had trust in their capabilities. They could do the job. And that's a different kind of trust. And both are important in creating trust in a relationship and environment. That I trust the character of who you are, and also your skill level, your capability, your competence in doing the job. And so I'm curious about your reaction to that. And in particular, so much of what you teach is about building trust in that relationship and how you build those aspects of that trust.
Yeah, look, here's my short answer to how do you relate to this. I will also be doing a book review of said book with my team over here. I think it's exactly on point, and it crystallizes something that we've been articulating differently for a long time, and it's so necessary. So I love it. I think it's a wonderful reflection, and this competence factor is a really big deal. And I think there's got to be a baseline standard of, we can't demand of others what it is that we ourselves are unwilling to put forth. And it doesn't mean that we have to be a technical expert in everything that everybody on the team does, but got to understand it to some degree. And
Yeah.
And for sure, in a fighter squadron, you do have to live it, because you're the person that's on night one of the war leading the first charge. And you better do it well, because everybody's hoping to come back home alive from this sucker.
Yeah. So I know that the foundation of what you teach, as we go from, all right, the things you learned in general about building high performance teams in the military and the Air Force specifically, you're now transferring and teaching to businesses and business leaders. And I know that much of your work is around the debrief process and accountability. So talk with our audience a little bit more about that. Tell me more about the debrief process, and why is that so central to what you teach?
Very good. So, and before I forget, just by the way, how awesome that I finally find out that your brother went to West Point. And here's your brother. Technically, as an Air Force Academy graduate, I'm supposed to do some sort of dig right now, but I will not do that. All right. So it's very good to know that about your family. So the world that I come from was a mission-oriented world, and it's important that folks that are listening to this understand that the world that I come from wasn't a task work overload world. It was a mission-oriented world. We organized ourselves around missions. Your brother organized to execute missions. And that is a very important orientation to getting performance. It actually, a mission is done for a reason. There's an intended outcome. There's a consequence. If we don't achieve said outcome, the entire team of teams is affected by this. One could argue that understanding the impact of mission outcomes and success or failure drives a sense of purpose and understanding of meaning and impact, which is so important in a world where there's increasingly less of that, it seems, at least in the organizations that you and I are focusing on. And so that's a driver of what could be performance there. With this mission orientation, especially in the high performance team world, we take our missions seriously. We plan for them. We're very, very disciplined in how it is that we plan. We want to plan to succeed. We're intentional about communicating the plan to our teammates, that they want to go out there and give their all. There's an element of that that's really useful in everything that you and I do. There's an execution phase for the missions that we conduct. There's some point where we're on and we're doing. And execution is always about adjusting the theory that we've crafted in planning to the reality of the world in which we execute it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question that I was interested in coming out of the military and going into the business world is, then what? And in many places, the then what includes like just moving on to the next thing, especially if we did well this time, if we achieved the desired outcome, there's more stuff coming. So let's just get on to it. The world that I come from says at the end of every thing that we do, every execution cycle, we should pause to learn why this one went the way that it did so that we can spark hope, confidence, optimism that the next one's going to go even better. Mm. And that's the piece that I began my journey working in business with, was teaching that piece, this reflection period of why did this iteration go the way that it did, so that we can have confidence that the next one's going to go better. And for us in a fighter squadron, that review is called a debrief, a post-mission debrief, the analysis of, hey, we planned for things to go this way. Mm-hmm. We talked about it. We went out there and then did it. Why did they go the way that they did? And that by itself is the most important feature of the world that I come from. The debrief is the place that we go to learn, is the most important thing that we do on any mission. And I figured, based upon my experience talking with friends when I was teaching at the weapons school, that this was something that may be missing in the business world, and I was going to go and fix. So that led to the writing of Debrief to Win.
And so when you were in the Air Force and you were teaching best practices around doing this, so I would just assume, and probably this is naive of me, that prior to you documenting those things, there was some debrief process. And so what did you do to change or improve the debrief process that you became the man on this topic? What was missing before?
Yeah, what was missing in the United States Air Force was a common language and a common process. Mm-hmm. Turns out every tribe had their own version of debrief. Mm-hmm. So when I came in 2004 and I was schwacked with the responsibility to standardize all of this, which had some political components to it, which were less than encouraging, I accepted this as a burden. Like my timing is bad and I must endure. Mm-hmm. So creating a common vocabulary for all the different sub-tribes was challenging, because it meant compromising as an F-15 pilot and changing a little bit of our vocabulary to accommodate other tribes. And it was trying to get them to accommodate some F-15 things. And that's always dynamic. And then there was the process piece. And there were some organizations back in 2004 where they didn't actually debrief ever. And so trying to give them an inject of process to help them to do what they were doing. That was an interesting one. There was other organizations that had always been debriefing, but just a little bit different from how we did it in the F-15 world. So trying to create a standard methodology that everybody across the team of teams would use. That was the challenge of the 2004 to 2006 timeframe. And that was my contribution to the Air Force.
And so you talk about how doing this debrief process is a cornerstone, a foundation of creating more of what I'll call a culture of accountability. So how does the debrief process create a culture of accountability?
Wonderful. And this is where we really get to the kind of the meat of this whole concept. Accountability, such a necessary component to performance.
And what is it? Let's define that. What is accountability? What does that mean?
Yeah, good. It means different things to different business leaders. That's for sure. Oftentimes when I ask a group of business leaders, what does accountability mean to you? They sometimes give an answer like, I'm not even sure.
And to your point, Cujo, when we're facilitating with a leadership group and helping them develop their fundamentals, their behaviors, as we call them, and I'll ask, so what are some of the things you wish there was more of? I would tell you that one of the first things that comes, it won't surprise you, out of most leaders' mouths are, we need more accountability around here. And I'll ask them, so what does that mean? What would people be doing that you would say, these people are being really accountable? What is it? And what I hear more often than not is it's kind of like a penal type thing. Well, if people were punished for not doing what they said they would do, that's accountability. And so I'm unclear even what we mean by that. So long way of saying, let me listen to you go deeper on what is accountability? What does that mean?
Excellent. Good. All right. So we have the same experience everywhere
Yes.
we go. Yeah, it's definitely been weaponized, this notion of accountability. Usually the phrase that's tied to it is we need to hold so-and-so to account for performance that hasn't been delivered.
Yes.
And I get that and I understand it. There's a lot of reasons why that's the case. For us in the high performance team world and the way that we've defined it at VMax Group, we say that accountability is taking absolute ownership for the outcomes that a team achieves.
Okay.
And we'll further define absolute as not qualifying or diminishing in any way. It would be disingenuous for somebody to come back and say, look, I own this, but, and the but's the problem there. And this notion of ownership says that if something happens on this team, and because the team is more important than self, and especially if we didn't perform, it's easy if we knocked it out of the park.
Mm-hmm.
Like accountability is relatively easy when we met or exceeded expectations, but when we didn't, we have to realize, and in the high performance team world, the ethos is if one of us fails, we all do, that each of us plays a role in that bad outcome. And so I'm going to take absolute ownership for my contribution to this thing. And if I'm the leader, I own everything that happens on my watch. And really for us in the high performance team world, ownership means I intend to learn why it is that we didn't meet the mark this time so that next time we get there.
That's a really interesting statement you just made, because I hear people, and I admittedly, I get confused by this, that when people say, I'm accountable for this. Okay, so it didn't happen. What does it mean? I'm going to just go out and fire everybody who didn't do what they do. So what does it mean to say I'm accountable? And I really like what you said. It's an interesting perspective on that. That what I'm hearing you say is saying that I'm accountable means that I take ownership for learning from that and putting in place whatever's necessary to ensure that doesn't happen again.
That's right. I mean, we're going to take action here. It's not sufficient to say, yeah, we didn't hit the mark. David, you and I had a project we were working on, didn't hit the mark. I own it. I own we didn't hit the mark.
Yes.
Right. And then nothing happens.
Yeah.
That would be the counter to what it is that we're looking for. High performance team world, we're trying to get to a better tomorrow. So if we didn't hit the mark today, yeah, I own this, and I own that I owe it to the team to figure out how we're going to do so the next time. Mm-hmm. And so the ownership means taking action to do better.
Well, that brings us to the end of the first part of my conversation with Cujo Teschner, combat veteran, author, and founder and CEO of VMax Group. In the next episode, we're going to stay on this subject of how the debrief process is the cornerstone and lays the foundation for a culture of real accountability. We also get into the obstacles that businesses will face when learning how to debrief to win. Next episode, Cujo shares exactly what those obstacles have been for him.
This has been Culture Architects with David J. Friedman. Join us next time for more insights and wisdom from great leaders in all walks of life. To book David for your next event or to learn more about his writing, speaking, or consulting, go to davidjfriedman.com. Culture Architects with David J. Friedman is a production of CultureWise.